Hello, everyone. My name is Tarek Rucab. I am a 26-year Microsoft certified trainer with ExitCertified and Excel instructor-led training. Today, I would like to briefly go over a quick demonstration on how to implement multi-factor authentication in Azure. And there's actually a couple ways to do that. We can do it on a per user basis, which is one user at a time, or maybe just a handful of users. And then we can also implement it in bulk, meaning many users, and or company-wide by using a conditional access policy. And that's what I would like to demonstrate here today. So you'll notice that I already have Azure opened up here and shared on my desktop. I'm going to move my picture over here to the far right. Okay, so I'm in the Azure portal and I went ahead and logged in to Microsoft Entra ID, which is Microsoft's cloud-based identity management solution and formerly called Azure AD. So if we come in here first, what I would like to show you is how to set up multi-factor authentication on a per user basis first. Now keep in mind, we're going to look at two ways where, again, we can set it up using multi-factor authentication on a per user basis. So one, maybe a user, maybe a couple more. And then from there, we can also implement it in bulk. And again, possibly for the entire company using a conditional access policy. Okay, so let's take a look at these two options. Now, first, if we come into the Azure portal and again, Microsoft Entra ID, right here under the Manage section, we're going to take a look at users. So if we come in and select users under Manage right here, okay, in the user section, right towards the top here, we are going to see per user MFA. So if we select that, that is going to show our users, and then it will show check boxes that we can select which user or which users, plural, we would like to implement multi-factor authentication on. Taking a little second to load there. Sometimes we get a little bit of cloud lag, and that's okay. Now, from there, if we take a look, we have several users here, and you'll notice that some are enabled, some are disabled. I just do various demonstrations whenever I'm teaching, and so some of these are just from previous demonstrations. So let's go to one or two of them that do not have it enabled, okay? So if we come down, like here's Lynn Robbins here. We'll notice that it's disabled right in here, showing us the multi-factor authentication status at the top. Okay, so if we come down here once again, so we'll come over to Lynn Robbins here. We will simply put the check on the checkbox here, and over towards the right, we'll see Enable. Okay, so at that point, we can just select Enable. You'll see Enable Multi-Factor Authentication. So we select that, and we'll see Update Successful. Multi-Factor Authentication is now enabled for the selected user accounts. Now you'll notice it shows accounts like plural because we can, select more than one of the checkboxes here if we wanted to. Okay, so that is an option as well. However, whenever we start getting into thousands of users, we don't want to come in here and put 1,000 checks, right? So we're probably going to want to implement a conditional access policy. Now, before we take a look at the conditional access policy, I do want to mention just a couple of things. Now, one, conditional access policies are used for many different reasons and deployment options in the Azure and Microsoft 365 ecosystems. Now today, we're in Azure and we're going to use it to force multi-factor authentication company-wide, which is highly recommended by Microsoft and by far a real-world best practice. And of course, you're working in cloud environment, which is wonderful, but it is internet-based. And, of course, anytime we're on the internet, there's always several bad actors there that we need to, of course, protect ourselves from. And we start that with multi-factor authentication. Now, of course, from there, there's so many other variations of security in Microsoft 365 and Azure. But today, we're just going to kind of focus on the multi-factor authentication conditional access policy. Okay, so right here's the per user. Okay, so short and sweet. So now let's go take a look on how to do it company-wide using a conditional access policy. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start right back in my Microsoft Entra ID tenant. Okay, so if you just log in Azure, you go directly into Microsoft Entra ID, it will look like this. Okay, so I'm on my tenant blade, if you will. Okay, so if we come down just a little bit here, Now, I could just come up to this top here and I could search for conditional access, press enter, and it will take me straight there. Okay, so please understand that the search bar is fantastic. And, with thousands and thousands and thousands of resources in Azure, that would be a very quick way to get where you need to be. But for learning purposes, I like to show you how to navigate there. Okay, so I'm just going to simply navigate right here from Microsoft Entra ID. So if we come down just a little bit, well, we're going to see security here. So I'm going to select security. So once we select the security blade here, you will see it takes us into a new environment where we see protect and manage and report. So quite a few options that are security related. So identity protection is in here as well, as you'll notice, which is a great feature from Microsoft Entra ID. Okay, but we're going to come right back up here towards the top underneath this protect section here, and we're going to select conditional access. So once we do that, that will take us to the conditional access portal to where we can come in and create our conditional access policies. And then also, before we go any further, I do want to mention a couple more things. Now, one, conditional access policies are used for many reasons between Azure, Microsoft 365, and then Endpoint Manager, Microsoft Intune, which is device management, okay? So once again, we're focused on implementing multi-factor authentication company-wide. Okay, so I do want you to hear a couple other options that are available. Now, one, we could always use it with Microsoft 365 Defender and Cloud Apps. And that is a way of monitoring some of the applications and their usage. And then we can also set it up to where we can block people from downloading data or content from certain cloud-based apps as well. Okay, and then also, and this is also another best practice, is if you're using Microsoft Intune Endpoint Manager, you're managing your devices, right? Mobile devices and desktops. And a lot of times we create compliance policies in there. And compliance policies are exactly what you think they would be. They deem a device as compliant or non-compliant. So the compliance policy could force, like BitLocker or a certain version of Windows or something to that extent. And again, we'll check the device to see if it's compliant. And then from there, deem its status either compliant or non-compliant. Okay. But where I'm going with that is if a device is not compliant, then there's a very good chance that we do not want it to log in and access company resources. So with Microsoft Intune, the compliance policy will simply deem the device either compliant or not. So it really kind of just checks the status and then tells us. But from there, it's not really going to prevent the user from logging into Outlook or Teams and accessing corporate data. So a best practice is to create the compliance policy, but from there, follow it up with a conditional access policy. And of course, its name, condition, so we clarify a condition or a set of conditions that must be obligated. And if they're not, we can prevent the user from authenticating and accessing resources in our environment. We would probably follow up, rather, a compliance policy with a conditional access policy, clarifying the condition that the device must be compliant. And if it's not, we can reject the user from logging in and authenticating to our tenant. Okay. So I would like you to hear that, and another great reason for conditional access, of course. Okay, but again, today we're going to focus on implementing multi-factor authentication company-wide, and let's say we want to do it for Microsoft 365. Okay, so if we come into our policies here, now keep in mind I am on the conditional access blade at this point, and if we come underneath the overview to policies, you'll see that we can create them right in here. Now, I already do have one just created, and that helps me demonstrate Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, and that is a conditional access policy that I'm using just to monitor them, okay? So I use that in my MS900 course, so whenever I get there, it's already populated with some information so I can demonstrate. Okay, so if we take a look at the top here, we're going to see new policy from template, some other options as well. But I would like to show you that there is actually a template readily available for this because, once again, it is by far highly recommended by Microsoft and a real-world best practice. Okay, so you'll notice there's a few templates here, but over here towards the right is the one I would like to point out. So you'll notice this one is require multi-factor authentication for all users. I could view it, even download the JSON file for it. Okay, so we could immediately, force MFA just that quickly, right? Okay, so for our demonstration, we will create one from scratch though. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and close this out here. Okay, now I'm still in the conditional access policy section here. So what we're going to do is just simply select new policy right here towards the mid left. And then once we select that, you'll notice on the left portion here that we have some options. Okay, so we need to give it a name. Now, I do want to reiterate that there can be quite a bit to a conditional access policy, several conditions, and various reasons to use it. So my goal here today is to implement multi-factor authentication company-wide. So I'm going to really kind of keep this one easy and kind of focus directly on that. Okay, so we can give it a name, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a name here, and we'll call it require multi-factor authentication for M365. Okay, now from there, we give it a name. We come down, well, what users do we want to assign the policy to? So you'll notice 0 users and groups selected here. Okay, so when I select that, none is the default. And of course, we could easily just come here and say all users very easily, which is our goal. However, we can also get pinpoint specific with certain users and certain groups in our tenant. So if we select that, it will add a few more checkboxes here. So we could force it for like guests and external users. So this would be basically guests and non-members of your tenant is what you're thinking here. Maybe people you invite into your tenant's access resources, maybe contractors, something to that extent. Directory roles is the second checkbox here. And this is really for the built-in role-based access control, such as global administrator, user access administrator, security operator, things like that. Now, there are many built-in roles in the Microsoft cloud environment that are for Azure, and of course, Microsoft 365, Microsoft Intune, so like the SharePoint administrators in there, the Exchange admin, the Intune admin. Now, again, our goal is to force it company-wide. Okay, however, can I just get pinpoint specific with maybe admin roles? Absolutely. And I would say, right out the gate that any admin role we should be forcing multi-factor authentication on, right? Okay, so just things to consider for real world. Now, again, in our demo, we're going to force it company-wide. Okay, so we could just come right back to all users here. But we do have the options here at our disposal, just to reiterate. And then also, if we click on it, it wants to know what role. So the options will change, depending on what checkbox you select here. Okay, and then also, can I multi-select? Well, of course I can. So if I wanted to implement it on all three, all users, all admin roles, right? Kind of too redundant here, but hypothetically, we do have the option to multi-select. All right, so I'm going to keep it easy here. We're just going to say all users. And then from there, you'll notice that there is an exclude option. So on the exclude option here, though, this is accounts you would want to exclude, and we have the same 3 checkboxes here. Okay, so for real world, what you might want to think here, and you may already be doing this as a best practice, it might be a really good idea to create a user account in Microsoft Entra ID that is not dedicated to anybody. Okay, so I won't create one just for Tarek. Now I'm going to have one, but we're going to create an additional one. And we're going to make that account a global administrator. And the idea behind it is we're going to exclude it from the conditional access policy, which I know I said I'm going to force it company-wide. Okay, but this one is used as an emergency. So a break glass account. So if we have an emergency, such as we improperly configure our multi-factor authentication here, could we possibly lock ourselves out of the tenant? And the answer is yes, we can. Now, I have to admit, it's kind of hard to do, but hypothetically, if you're not paying attention as you're dotting the I and crossing the T with a conditional access policy, can you shoot yourself in the foot and lock yourself out of your own tenant? And again, that answer is yes. So it might be a good idea to create what they call an emergency break glass account, which again is basically an account that is a part of the global administrators group that is not dedicated to a specific user. And if you're not familiar with the global admins, that is a group that has full control to your tenant. Okay. All right, so in this example, I'm just simply going to exclude myself just for simplicity and also to make sure I do not lock myself out. Okay, so on the exclude tab here, I'm going to select users and groups, and I'll just type in Tarek here for my name. We're going to see my user account in here right there. So we'll select that. Okay, so at this point, just to reiterate, we gave it a name. Okay, we're going to include all users. All right, and then what application or what applications plural do we want to force MFA on? Okay, so under target resource here, where we see no target resources selected, I'm going to click on that. Now you'll see it kind of looks similar. So we have none, all cloud apps, or selected, and we can get pinpoint specific. Now we could say all cloud apps. Now that's very broad and there are just thousands of them out there. Okay, so remember our goal today is say, oh, we're going to force it on Microsoft 365. So I'm going to come down just a little bit further here where we see select and we have none. Okay, but I'm going to click on none. So as we click on that, it's going to start populating a lot of the cloud apps over here underneath. And you'll see like Microsoft Azure portals. Now that are admin portals. Now that would be any admin portal, whether it's Azure, Microsoft 365, right? And then you have the SharePoint Administrative Center, right? Microsoft Intune or Endpoint Manager. So that could be pretty awesome as well. Something to consider for real world. Okay, now from there, you'll notice that they do list quite a few of the Azure or Microsoft Cloud apps. Let me correct myself there. And also, we wanted to get pinpoint specific. Now, I'm going to force it on Microsoft 365, which means the entire suite. Whether it's Teams, whether it's Outlook, doesn't matter. I'm forcing it on the entire Microsoft 365 suite, productivity and collaboration apps. But we can also get pinpoint specific. So you'll notice that as I start to scroll down here, like there's Microsoft Forms, which is one of the apps, of course, in Microsoft 365. Okay, so Teams would be in here. There's Microsoft Intune all by itself. There's Microsoft Stream, which is video and video editing. Okay, and then there's Teams, of course. So I could get pinpoint specific. Oh, I just want it for Teams, right? Okay, so I do like to point that out. Now, again, I'm going to force it for the entire app. So I'm going to scroll all the way back to the top here. I'm going to select Office 365 here. And then you'll notice there's an I next to it. As a matter of fact, you'll see that all throughout the Azure portal. It is for information. So a lot of times when you put your mouse over the I there, it will give you some brief information that might help you. But a lot of times it also will give a URL that allows you to go a lot more in depth and do a deep dive on whatever you're working with. I find them extremely beneficial and I like to point them out in some of my demonstrations. Okay, so we're simply going to select Office 365 here. And I also want to point out that I could select more than one app. So if I did want to add, a couple more apps there and force MFA, multi-factor authentication on all three as an example, I most certainly can. Okay, now I am going to keep it simple and I'm going to use just Microsoft 365 here. Okay, so I'm going to remove the other two apps, but, just indicating that you could do that. All right, so I'm going to select, okay, and just again, we gave it a name, all users except Tarek, and then one app, which is Office 365 or Microsoft 365. It still shows Office 365 there, of course. Okay, now it is conditional access. So we have a bunch of conditions that we can clarify as well. Okay, but my goal is to keep this very easy and straight to the point today. So we are just simply forcing multi-factor authentication company-wide, which again, highly recommended by Microsoft and a real-world best practice. So we're going to skip over that and we'll come right down to grant here. And at this point, under the grant section on the far right, we'll notice that we have a lot of checkboxes here and then a couple of radio buttons at the top. Now, one shows block access and the other one shows grant access. So if we select grant access here and then a checkbox underneath, that's going to be our condition, right? So in this conditional access policy, I simply put all users using Microsoft 365 must use multi-factor authentication. That's it, all right? Now, again, you'll see there's many other options, but like I said, my goal here today is just to force multi-factor authentication company-wide, and we're going to do exactly that. So at this point, we will select. All right, and I do want to just reiterate our steps one more time. So we gave it a name. We selected all users and excluded technically the emergency break glass account, which in this case, I just excluded myself there. Okay, our target resource was Office 365 apps. We did not clarify any additional conditions. We came down to grant and we just simply said grant access, but require multi-factor authentication. Okay. Now also, just while we're here real quick, if we come down a little bit, you'll see required device to be marked as compliant. So remember, earlier in the presentation, I mentioned that it's also used to follow up a compliance policy with Microsoft Intune. So as I mentioned earlier, the Microsoft Intune compliance policy will simply deem the device either compliant or non-compliant, but it will not prevent the user from accessing corporate data, right? So we typically follow that up with a conditional access policy, and the condition in that case would be require the device to be marked compliant. Okay, and if it is, come on in. If it's not, we're going to block you. All right. Okay, so I just like to squeeze that one in or kind of just point that out. Okay, so at this point, I'm not going to change anything else. I'm simply going to come back down towards the bottom left here. You will notice that it shows report only. Now, there's an on and off. So report only means we might still be gathering information to make better informed decisions on what conditions that we're going to clarify with this policy. Okay, but I feel like I'm ready. Again, my goal is just to force multi-factor authentication company-wide. Okay, so I'm simply going to turn it on and then create. Now at this point, any user that has not registered for multi-factor authentication will be forced to, and then subsequent attempts, of course, will force multi-factor authentication. Okay, so we'll test that out just real quick. So we created our policy. So now let's come and create a user real quick. So we'll come right back into Microsoft Entra ID, formerly known as Azure AD, just to give you a heads up there. So now called Microsoft Entra ID, which again is Microsoft's cloud-based identity management solution for all Microsoft Cloud. All right, so we'll come in here and we have a user right here, or we have our users, excuse me. And then what we'll do is we'll create a brand new user here. And then of course, we'll log in with this user. Now I'm going to call the user, just a generic name here real quick. Okay, and then we'll follow that up for their display name, and then we're going to give them a password. And make it a little bit stronger there. Okay, so at this point, we'll just go ahead and create this user real quick. All right, and then we'll log on with this user, and it should force us to it should force us to register for multi-factor authentication, being it's a brand new user here. Okay, so I'm going to copy this UPN here. We'll bring up a private browser. All right, and let's say that we want to go to portal.office.com in this situation as a regular user. Now, keep in mind at this point, all users will be forced to use multi-factor authentication, so administrators as well. Okay, the way that we set that up. And we will immediately see more information required. So at this point, it's going to force us to register for multi-factor authentication. So if we go next here, okay, it's going to want us to use the Authenticator app, which we can control what authentication methods are used, by the way. As a matter of fact, I will show that right after this. Okay, so we'll see download now, and of course, go next. Now, also, you may not have your phone with you. You know, you might be at on somebody else's device or something to that extent, or you may not want to download the application. So they will give you alternative methods here, if you will. So if we select, I want to set up a different method here. We can drop this down and we can say Authenticator app or phone. Okay, so I guess you do want your phone with you after saying that in hindsight, right? Okay, but let's say we don't want to download the Authenticator app and I just want to register and I just want to use my phone. So we can select that and confirm. we type in our phone number here, receive a code, and then we will finish the registration process, okay? Now, I'm not really going to do that here today, but you'll see that it is immediately prompting me to register for MFA. And it's not going to let me skip it. So you might be familiar with, oh, skip this step. It's not going to let me skip it because the policy says what? It is required, right? Okay, so hopefully that will help a little bit and provide some insight next time that you have to set this up for your company or in real world. And I hope that that will help you out a little bit there. Okay, and let's take a look at one more thing and then we'll close up this demonstration. Okay, so I'm going to come right back into Microsoft Entra ID. And what I want to show you now is that we can control, what authentication methods they use. Like I prefer the Authenticator app. I think it makes it very easy for people. Most people will have their phone with them, of course, but we can use other methods like FIDO, if you're familiar with that, which is fast identity online. And of course, we could also use like one-time passwords and things like that. So right back here in the Microsoft Entra ID tenant, if we come down just a little bit, and matter of fact, we're going to come right back to security where we started every bit of this, right? So you'll see conditional access, of course, towards the top there under the protect section. Okay, but this time we're going to go underneath the manage section right here. And we will literally see authentication methods right in there. And at this point, you'll see that these are the methods that we can set up or even force, our users with. Now you'll notice here that I have Microsoft Authenticator, so that's the app, and I have this one, assigned to all my users, and that's just what I set up. But we have, here's the FIDO key. We have other options as well, like I said, voice call, one-time passwords, things like that, or hardware tokens. Okay, so you really just click on any one of these, okay? So I'm going to come right back to Microsoft Authenticator here. Now, I already do have this one set up, okay? So you'll see it's already enabled. And at this point, you say all users, or we could even say select groups. So at that point, if we want to come in and kind of get pinpoint specific, so you can get crafty with this. If you want like group 1 to say, oh, you're going to use the Authenticator app, right? But group 2, you're going to use a voice call, right? Group 3, you're going to use maybe FIDO, right? So we have that luxury. Okay, I'm just going to kind of point that out. I'm going to leave the defaults here, or what I already have configured rather. Okay, so we'll close this out, but I at least wanted to show you that we could also control what authentication methods they're using as well. And then if we are using Microsoft Intune, which is device management, also known as endpoint manager, then we could also force like Windows Hello and go into biometric authentication, whether it's facial recognition, finger scans, and things like that. That's just a little taste of conditional access policy, once again, to force multi-factor authentication company-wide. Again, so I hope that you were able to find some insights there and help you out in real world with that scenario and that demonstration. I really appreciate you joining me here today and having fun with me during the demo. Thank you once again.